never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
And you just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, and all the things that go with
it. Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Sam Monson here, as always. Not Steve, though. Steve's driving his ass and the family in the minivan all the way down to Florida. So we have a crossover show. Dr. Eric Eager in the house, which means actual analytics, actual math, not whatever me and Steve do in terms of conveying the work done by others. Welcome in, Eric.
Sam, it's great to be here. This has been a fun offseason so far. I did my own PFF forecast yesterday. First time we've had another host besides me or George.
Okay.
So I think the crossover. I'm primed for a crossover today.
Nice. You went on an actual coffee run. You went out of the building. You went to get real coffee. I am powered by Death Wish coffee.
Okay.
Which apparently is the world's strongest coffee. Our buddy Eric over at Eric, right? I think that's his name. I'm gonna get confused because you're Eric. But our guy Eric at Death Wish Coffee sent us some because we were lamenting the lack of a coffee sponsorship for the PFF NFL show.
Yeah.
And he was like, I got you. He sent us a whole bunch of coffee, and it's strong. It's strong and it's good.
That's awesome. I'm a pretty big degenerate when it comes to coffee. I went to Tim Hortons today, the Canadian brand, on the way here.
Where is that?
So I live in Lebanon, which is like...
You're out there.
I'm out there. So like...
Not quite Canada, though.
Not quite Canada, but close. And, there are a few places in the U.S. that will sell Tim Hortons. I like Tim Hortons. But then I got here, and our colleague, my friend Dave Silfaro, was like, hey, do you want some more coffee? And I was like, absolutely. So I got another cup here from a local place in town. So I'm ready to go.
Because my parents used to live up near Buffalo, and that's close enough that there's Tim Hortons around. That makes sense. Lebanon's, I wouldn't have expected them to make it as far south as that.
We're closer to the Dayton airport there than we are to the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport. So
wow, you are out there.
It is something, but we're in the office today. Beautiful digs here. Much more elaborate setup than we have at the forecast. We're
starting to get a lot of trinkets, all right, between the helmets. This is my old West Dublin Rhinos get-up, and then obviously the coffee gear. Bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. What do we got coming up? I still haven't done the TikTok dance, but the final piece of the costume, I guess, has arrived. I've been a little bit sick the last few days, and frankly, I just wasn't learning the TikTok dance whilst laid under with like tonsillitis or whatever the hell I'm dealing with here. Not COVID though. Clear test. We're fine.
Good.
So that'll come maybe next week. Steve is going to miss this show and Monday's show. Austin Gale will be coming back on Monday's show. And then I'm out of here for this road trip that I was talking to you about off air. And Steve's getting in a whole bunch of guests. So keep firing in emails, keep firing in topic suggestions, comments, questions, anything that's on your mind. NFLpodcast@pff.com or the Twitter and the TikTok. You can see them there on the screen. Before we get into the show, though, we have to tell you all about the studio sponsor, Western and Southern there, the fancy plaque on the wall. The PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. Luckily, you've got first pick in selecting the right money moves. Do you need life insurance? What about help planning for your financial goals? Don't pass on this round. Use your position to expand your financial education and learn more with information on life insurance, investing, and retirement planning at westernsouthern.com/draft. westernsouthern.com/draft. All right, Eric.
That was a very professional read, by the way.
Thank you.
I'll tell you a story. Yesterday, when we did our pod, I just breezed through the whole thing and forgot to read any ads. And so you come to like really appreciate the George Shahuris of the world when you're in their place. You're like, yeah, there are aspects of this thing that me as a lowly analyst don't really understand.
Yeah, when Steve isn't here, it throws the ad reads front and center, and you're like, I just get to switch off and let him read the ads, and then he's not here, and so all of a sudden I got to do
pot shots at the ads, the Manscaped. Of course.
Yeah, I mean you can chime in or whatever, but generally speaking, you can just sort of switch off and let him deal with it.
Do you guys have the lawn care company? I mean, we
went
from one lawn
Sunday.
Care, we went from one lawn care company
to two. We got emails saying that it took them 3/4 of the way through the Sunday read before they realized it wasn't a Manscaped read. And when you've heard that and you listen to it again, you're like, yeah, this is actually a minefield of double entendres. You get all the way. Yeah. I mean, Manscaped could just adopt the copy for the Sunday read and be most of the way there to a full read themselves.
Do you think that they, when they were creating this ball shaver, let's just be honest, like, do you think they ever for lack of a better term, did they think that thing, the bit had legs? Because honestly, it's the advertising.
Yeah.
It's not like tool is not.
I think very early on in the Manscaped world of corporate identity, they must have determined that the way this thing gets success is, turning it into kind of a joke.
Yeah.
Not like a laugh at them, what a farce that is, but like making the whole thing fun. Because you can't. Otherwise, you can't. You're not going to get away with like putting a serious face on that and be like, hey, you actually have to turn the thing into fun. So making the reads, making the whole advertising, making the branding generally a fun thing is the only way you're going to sell that to people, I think.
Yeah.
They've done well.
I agree. I think when you look at the autopsy of all the other ball shavers, that was where they missed.
There is the road to good personal hygiene is littered with failed ball shavers that aren't Manscaped. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Without the marketing creativity.
Yeah. So I messaged you yesterday, and I was like, okay, doctor, we've got some emails in, we've got some topics that we can hit, but what have you been working on? Because you're the R&D department. You are the skunk works. You're the M division of BMW. The guy's locked in the building over there doing weird stuff that nobody else knows how to do and coming up with cool things that eventually make it to the front-facing marketplace. So you had a thing. You had something you've been working on. You're gonna hit me with it.
Yeah. So I agree. I think that what's really fun about the jobs we all have is like, at its core, like we're trying to understand football better. Right. So my group, we have access to XY tracking data through some context we have and so forth. And one of the things we're trying to understand is, and I think you and Steve have been around longer than anybody, the grading system better than I do and better than I think anybody in the world. There are parts of our data where I think we do an absolute bang up job. I think, pass rushers, when Jermaine Johnson isn't a productive college pass rusher, and we've seen history say that like to be a great NFL pass rusher, you need elite athleticism and college production, with a few exceptions, Donnell Hunter being one of them. And so when somebody like Jermaine Johnson or Trayvon Walker come in and don't have that kind of production, it's a red flag, right? Linebacker coverage, linebacker play, I think we're a lot less. The data is just a lot more noisy. Like there are players like Deion Jones who weren't great college players but flashed traits that ended up being pretty good NFL players. There are linebackers like I think of, we were talking about the USFL upstairs, like Scooby Wright, who like sort of did everything right in college, pun intended, and ultimately just didn't have it to play in the league. And so
great example of an early lesson for. We start PFF college grading. We have those the first couple of years where we didn't know what any of it meant, right? It's like, well, this guy's an amazing college player. Grades are off the chart. Does that mean he'll be a great NFL player? Who the hell knows? Let's start talking about him, right? So Scooby Wright was one of those guys. Grades amazing, graded everything. Just wasn't a good NFL player. Obviously has a level, and apparently that level is like the USFL.
Yeah, and by the way, like there are a lot more wins than losses in that story,
Sure.
right? There's Grady Jarrett, there's Trey Flowers, there's Tyler Lockett, there's back in I joined PFF in 2015, which was a year after you guys started college, but I was a fan before, and I listened to you guys' shows, and like there were a lot more players who you Shaq Mason, you guys were like, he's a good football player. I think it'll translate, but we don't have necessarily that second. Like this is the first time anybody was collecting data on this on NCAA in that sort of graininess, and there were misses, but Yannick Ngakoue was another one, right, where he was just such a bad run defender in college that we thought prohibitively so.
Right.
Been a good pass rusher in the NFL, and so now we sort of like equate those things properly, right? But linebacker is one of those positions where I sort of thought that this was a place where we could do a little bit better. So a few of the folks in my group, so like Timo Riske, Ben Brown, a couple of interns we had, Zach Drapkin, who now works for the Eagles, and Tage Seth. We went through and looked at sort of two traits by linebackers. One of them was how much do you bite on play action, and and this is the new one. We published that part in the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference in this spring. And the next one was how good are you at chasing down the running back? So and you have to adjust for certain situations. So, for example, on 3rd down and 10, if you are like a dime linebacker, you're not going to bite on that many play action plays relative to a guy like Zach Cunningham, who's more of a 1st and 2nd down player. And same thing in the run game. You're not going to flow as much on 3rd and 10. So you have to do a lot of like mathy stuff on the play level to sort of take down and distance situation. And then Steve Palazzolo had a great idea, which is like how often do you run certain coverages, right? If you're a man coverage team, you're going to retreat less. If you're a zone team, you're going to retreat more. What kind of inside zone, outside zone? There was somebody for with NGS that said outside zone teams do better on play action than other types of run scheme teams. And so you adjust for all that and you come up with an expectation. So on this play, this linebacker position is expected to bite a yard towards the line of scrimmage on run plays. Okay, well, he bit 2 yards. So above expected, it was 1 yard bitten above expected. On this run play, the distance between him and the running back closed in by 5 yards in the first 2 seconds of the play. Well, on plays like that, it's actually supposed to be 7. So he's 2 yards worse than average, that kind of thing. And so what's really cool is these metrics, I would consider them trait-based. And they're more stable year to year than measures that we've had previously. And I think the coolest thing about them is there is the trade-off that we all think exists, which is the Zach Cunninghams of the world that bite voraciously on play action are also really good at hunting down the running back. And so the question is are there players who are really good at not biting at play action, but are also really instinctive against the run? And there are some of those players. And some of them make sense, like Dante Hightower, right? A guy who's been consistently, great in this league. And there are other guys who our grading system hasn't liked, but have gotten contracts in the league. And that's like Blake Martinez, right? Blake Martinez is weirdly a guy who doesn't bite that hard on play action, but also is pretty good at stopping the run. So I think it's added to our understanding. I think it's made a little bit of and then we can turn it around, and one thing I'll talk about in a second is we can turn it around and ask, how do offenses influence this stuff? And are there players who are sort of special in that way?
So we had a guy email in actually that you touched on a bit of his question there. I hadn't planned on bringing this email up, and now that I have, I've realized that his name is going to be a tricky one, right?
Okay.
So it's from Victor. Victor's surname, I think, is Sunners Joe, I guess. Maybe Sunners Yo, depending on what language that is. Anyway, he was basically talking about that idea of expectation, right, that you brought up there. And essentially was saying, for a layman, it's difficult to understand when people are talking about completion percentage, over expectation, et cetera. What goes into it? I guess it's going to be a case of it depends what it is you're looking at, right? Like you just talked about, for those linebackers and flow of the football, you need to adjust for down and distance, you need to adjust for coverages, all those kinds of things. And this is probably the case for completion percentage over expectation, but it's going to be a slightly different set of things that you're adjusting. But essentially, it's those things that you're trying to normalize so that the data is...
Yeah, and for completion percentage over expected, like, by the way, big fan of Ben Baldwin, big fan of the next gen stat people. I really think that their analysis is great, and if you put together PFF Grade, PFF WAR, CPOE, and EPA, like if you combine those in one metric, that's the best way to predict quarterback play from one year to the next. CPOE has, just like anything, including PFF Grade, has it has its areas where it can be exploited. Let's say if you just want to use one metric to rank players, think about like Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes doesn't have that high of a CPOE because he sort of engineers passes that by the time the ball's thrown, the accuracy is the trivial part, right?
That was always the Tom Brady thing, right? Yeah. For years, it was like very early on in PFF's time, Tom Brady wasn't grading that well, but he was winning everything, right? Because the Patriots were that dominant force, and I used to spend half my life being thrown to the wolves on New England radio, trying to justify why Tom Brady wasn't the best graded quarterback in the NFL. Yeah. And you were like, well, we're not giving him credit for throwing a 5-yard drag to Wes Welker that's open, that Wes Welker is then taking another 5-10 yards, right? And they're like, well, it's the work he does before that to generate that pass. And you're like, yeah, I mean, there is something to that, but it's not like there's only so much we can give him credit for that. Yeah. But that's an example, right? Like you do that time after time after time after time, you will have more success. You'll be a better quarterback than the guy that doesn't, and it's not quite showing up in the grading the way you need it to.
Well, it was the sort of story about that Kansas City Green Bay Monday night game where Rodgers threw the 5 touchdowns and we gave him basically a 0 grade. Yeah. And you go back and look and you're like, oh, none of these throws are all that impressive. He
0 in the old system, which is average, which is like a 60-something now.
And he had a fumble in the pocket and he threw an interception on a play that got reversed and stuff. So there was a ton of context. But also like being able to check into the bubble screen to Randall Cobb, is part of being a quarterback. And it's sort of, and on the other side of the stick, like we have, both of us grew up Vikings fans. You have Kirk Cousins, right, where there's sort of a Goodhart's law to it as well, where he sort of knows what's going to get him his next contract, and he's checking down and he's doing things that aren't going to get dinged by our system because they're not bad things in a vacuum, but they don't add up to winning football. And it's sort of the same thing too with CPOE. It's like he does really well in CPOE because he's a good passer. But he doesn't engineer easy throws for himself. Right. So he's engineering hard throws and he hits on a few of them. So you get a few of these plays that are super improbable that he completes, and then that puts his metric in a positive light. Not to say he's a bad quarterback. I'm just saying that those are kind of like the crevices of the data where I think you need to have a very complete look.
Yeah, like any one number, there's always some kind of exploit. Like nook or cranny or crease to it that you can warp it in a slight manner. So anyway, hopefully that goes some way towards answering your question, Victor. Apologies if I butchered your surname. Anyway, linebackers.
Yeah. So I think the coolest part about this is like finding out players, to your point, like PFF grades is this great thing, right? But you look at, guys that we have not graded all that well. It's like Devin White, right? You look at Devin White, I sort of think about him as kind of the Chris Carter fall guy of that defense, right? Like you sort of, everything goes right on that defense. They rush the passer really well. They cover, and the offense funnels the ball to Devin White, and then Devin White like misses a tackle or something like that. But it's still like a 6-yard gain on 3rd and 10. We might ding him a little bit for a grade. And so overall, like that whole defense grades well, except for Devin White. It's like, but yeah, the sum of the parts is still a pretty good defense, right? And so, okay, how can we – and there might be a case where he's just not necessarily as good as public perception, but in this data, he's actually quite good at, like, he doesn't bite on play action. He's pretty good at flowing to the run. Both him and Levante David are actually, like, making that sacrifice a little bit, which is and David actually less so. David is the flower on that defense. But, like, both of the guys sort of, like, stay back on play action better. And, again – that's probably because they built their defense around Vita Vea and stuff like that, guys that can handle the run game themselves, and the linebackers sort of can be pass first and stuff. But it highlights so many cool things about football, and I'll bring it back to the offensive side of the ball, which is if you can look at linebacker movement, you can also look at players that cause differentials in linebacker movement. So for the longest time, when Lamar Jackson won NFL MVP, he was kind of more like 5th in our WAR metric because rushing isn't as efficient as passing, and there haven't been quarterback rushers who have really done what Lamar has done. Cam Newton was a little different.
Right.
And so we didn't have the historical precedent in our data to really value Lamar Jackson as highly as maybe he was. And so I look at, when you look at, Joe Flacco on that offense, and you look at Lamar Jackson once he was inserted in that offense, linebackers moved basically a half a yard less once Lamar Jackson got into the offense. So now you can see plainly, like, okay, this is the effect he's had. Yeah. This is the gravity he's having on this team.
Literally paralyzing defenders for a period.
Right. And so, like, our manual graders, like, of course we're not going to, we intuitively understand this, but I wouldn't want somebody who's in our system to go in and be like, okay, how much is the linebacker moving and stuff?
Right.
Like, we're much more of a, did they bite? Okay, good, -1 or something like that. Or, did they flow well? Okay, plus 0.5. But like, it's these sort of little edges that, like, the truly transcendent players. You look at Derrick Henry. Like, Derrick Henry, people do bite on Derrick Henry's play action. Like, it's the one, and you can see it. It's like maybe a half a yard more than an average running back. Okay, well, that space is maybe why Ryan Tannehill has had a rebirth in his career versus when he was in Miami, where he was just simply an okay quarterback.
Being able to quantify that, I think, is really cool. The other area, just off the top of my head, that it seems like it would have a really useful way of impacting is when you're evaluating linebackers. And so a lot of the time you look at these guys in college and you're sort of saying, well, he doesn't win. He struggles when he has to take on blocks, right? Mm-hmm. It's like all of his wins are getting around blockers rather than going through them or playing off the block, and that just doesn't translate at the next level and blah, blah, blah. And I think ultimately it might be one of those things where it doesn't necessarily matter how you get there as long as you're getting there regularly, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can still get – so there are definitely players where they win by getting around blocks and then they get to the next level and they just can't do that anymore, and that's a problem. But I bet there's also a ton of players that in today's NFL, you simply don't need to play the game the way you used to. You don't need to be Bart Scott, right, in order to play linebacker anymore. You don't need to, like, launch yourself face first at a guard and then shed and make the play. You can run the hell around a block a lot of the times. It's particularly if you're a high-level athlete, which is what everybody's chasing at the linebacker position. So I wonder if that would, if that's – so did you run that for – college players?
So we don't have college tracking data. So this is the thing. So
I wonder how that would show up for a guy like Nakobe Dean, who's getting dinged because, well, what if Nakobe Dean gets to the next level and now he doesn't have the Georgia defense all around him and it's different? I bet he would still show really well in that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think, like, that's what we're trying to get at. I mean, obviously, I think there is going to be a time when everybody. You already had StatsBomb show that they've been able to collect some college tracking data. I think the future is pretty bright there, and to be able to, to pin down. And one of the other parts that was in this paper, and this was one of the reasons why I was gassing up Marquez Valdez-Scantling a lot, is just like looking at wide receivers on deep patterns, trying to re-engineer what their 40-yard dash is, right? So, guys like Antonio Brown, Cooper Kupp were not great runners at combines, but run faster than that indicates. Now, Cooper Kupp's not a 4.3 guy on the field. He's a 4.5 guy. But that's a lot better than the 4.62 he ran coming out of Eastern Washington. And
what do you put that difference down to?
I think it's just body control. Like
because I've always speculated that I suspect this is more, the smaller the player, the bigger a deal this is. But I think there are players that carry pads and a helmet better than others. Like it's not an insubstantial volume of crap to put on your body and then say go out and run as fast as you humanly can, right? A set of pads and a helmet and the ancillary crap that you have to wear in terms of, like, thigh pads and knee pads now, like it's stuff, right? And the smaller a person you are, the bigger and more awkward that is. And I think there are players that just handle that better. There are players for whom a set of pads and a helmet is nothing, and they just run like they're right there in in Under Armour spandex. And there are guys where you put all that stuff on them and all of a sudden it's awkward. It messes with their flow or their biomechanical rhythm, and they're just not as fast as they are when they're not wearing that stuff.
Yeah, I think this is the great part about math is, like, sort of somebody like me will come in, and I have intuition. I mean, I played in college, but I don't have the football knowledge that you have or a scout has. So, what I can do is pose questions to people who understand the game a little bit better than I do. Where I think it's somewhat of the – so what we did is take the PFF grades, and this is why, the thing of the paper, and you can go to – if you Google Sloan Sports Analytics Conference and you're a psycho and you want to read the math, it's on the internet. It's published there. Go ahead and read it. But my thesis was it's also just about being able to control your speed, right? So the Corey Colemans of the world – and the John Rosses. So John Ross ran a 4.2 something in the combine. His on-field speed is like 4.45, right? Which isn't slow, but when you combine that with not being able to do anything else, you're just a wide receiver.
You're literally taking away the one trick Pony has.
It was like when the Vikings played the Saints in 2004, and Moss hurt his hamstring, and Joe Theismann on camera said, "Look, without his speed, Moss is just a tall receiver." That's a throwback there. But so for me, I think it's about being able to control yourself. We have the PFF grade. So my thing is, the model is, can you run fast? So you look at median speed, max speed, and mean speed. So there are 3 different readings. Can you maintain your speed? Can you hit a top speed that's pretty high? And then some combination of that, which is the average. And then it's PFF grade, which is, did you track the ball well enough as a player to catch it, right? And so, everybody on that top list is a good football player. It's Cooper Kupp, it's Devontae Adams. And then in the top 15, there was the 2020 season for Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And people will say, oh, he didn't have a great PFF grade. You go look back, the guy was a very productive deep threat that year. And when you go back and look in the film, and again, for people like me, it's super dangerous to go back and look at the film because I might not know what I'm looking at or whatever. But he tracked the ball well. He made big plays. And so I'm like, is he being undervalued? And I think when you take these, let's face it, PFF, whether people like it or not, is the table stakes for understanding football.
Right.
Every single time a lineman is signed, every time a defensive end is signed, every time a receiver is signed, the PFF grade is what people report. So to understand more about the game, even us, and that's our company, we have to sort of pivot from that initial place to a different place to try to find value on players. And I think that through building new metrics, you can kind of do that.
I think the other thing at play with the 40 that we've brought up a lot before is that so much of like the timed 40 time is your start, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know how to start or you just don't start well, your 40 time changes not just like a tiny bit, it changes dramatically. So a lot of these guys, like a John Ross, right? So much of John Ross's 40 time might just be the dude is an incredible starter as a sprinter. And if you take that away, which you do when you put him on an NFL field because you're not starting in a sprinter stance, nobody's lining up like 1980 Jerry Rice anymore, with the 3-point stance off the line in the Super Bowl. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
These guys are out there in 2-point stances, and you got to release off the line before you can get anywhere. So that changes entirely what your sprint.
Isn't it just resources too? Like I have to look at this actually, but like there's a couple things. We've shown that there's tons of discrepancies in combine and pro day data. There's an article on PFF.com, just Google that, and you can look and see like it's totally different. But also, there's no mistake that like you have Antonio Brown who played in the MAC, right? His 40 time is a lot worse than how he played on the field. You have an FCS player in Cooper Kupp. You have Jerry Rice, who is, that at that time it would be an FCS player at Mississippi Valley State. Like it's to your point. It's like if I'm playing for Alabama, like I can just hire a speed coach who tells me how to start, and I can get over that. That was kind of the perplexing thing about Kyle Hamilton, which is like he played for a pretty big program. He was the best player on the team, and that was his issue. I think that plays a factor.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it does. And I think that's why we're going to see, or we have been seeing, these sort of record-setting combine or pro day performances the last couple of years. Like, this is a thing now. People are so good at getting prepared and trained for this, particularly if they're like, like last year, basically taking a year off and doing nothing but training for it. They should be setting absurd record-breaking numbers. Like, this is what they're doing for an extended period of months before they show up and do this testing. That should absolutely be way better than a dude that like 10 years ago, spent like a week learning how to do this and then rocked up, and that was basically what he tried to do. It should absolutely be a different level set that we're looking at.
And I'm always worried about like how I view this, because in theory, you should be doing all these things to be for your job interview kind of thing. But that's I don't think that that's a reality, you know, and, you know, being a former academic and stuff, you always, you know, I ran a grant program where you get applicants and you could see like this person's been coached, this person hasn't been coached. Right. You know, I think that you get that in all walks of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get into some kind of retrospective look at the draft and some sort of ways that analytics view some of this stuff. But first, this podcast is sponsored by Sunday. So this is a Sunday read, not a Manscaped read. Mm-hmm. Just bear that in mind.
Different lawn.
Does your lawn have weeds? Your grass lawn, the lawn for your house. Bare patches or pet spots. Sunday can help you solve all these problems and more the easy way. They've got everything you need from fertilizer to seeds to weed control, and it's all delivered right to your door. Sunday can help you grow a beautiful lawn without the guesswork or the nasty chemicals. Their custom plans include fertilizer and everything you need to easily care for your lawn. You can feel good with kids and pets running around. Just attach the ready-to-use pouch to a garden hose and spray. It takes less than 15 minutes. Even Steve can manage it. And Sunday is offering our listeners 20% off. Full season plans start at just $129, and you can get 20% off at checkout when you visit getsunday.com/NFLpod. That's 20% off your custom plan at getsunday.com/NFLpod. Have you presumably got quite some lawn up in Lebanon?
Yeah.
Otherwise, what the hell is the point in being in Lebanon?
Actually, George and I were talking about this on the podcast. So we rent. So like we've never bought since we sold and moved here. And there's I don't think this is politically correct, but I believe it's called this, the Wives of Lebanon Facebook group.
Wow.
And there was a person on there who was complaining about renters who don't take care of their yards and make the community look like crap.
Is it you?
And Stephanie, my wife, told me, she's like, I don't think it's me. They pointed out, but like, I honest to God, I have not cut grass since I moved there. I have not. And by the way, when I lived in Wisconsin, this was not true. I have not shoveled snow since I moved here.
Really?
Yeah. Like the snow is never that fierce where
it's been bad enough that I needed to.
Okay, because I have and I used to cut grass at the old house that we used to rent, but I don't, you know, I mean, I think we got a service. I think we got Sunday. You know, so I don't have to do that.
It's like a legit peer pressure thing though. Like we live in a small cul-de-sac. There's like 10 houses or whatever, and most of them are like pretty hardcore manicured, you know, look perfect.
Right.
You're like, I can't just let this thing look like a meadow or whatever. I need to, and right now it's growing like crazy. So I got to be out like every week mowing the front. Now look, the back, people can't see it, so I don't care as much. Mm-hmm. But the front,
doesn't stop Manscaped from making a lot of money.
It's true. But it is crazy how much like, it's like a thing. You can't let your yard go to rack and ruin while everybody around you is looking perfect.
When I lived in Wisconsin, there was no one under the age of like 40 that lived in our cul-de-sac, and our lawn was like an acre and a half. So I would go like once every 10 days, and that was actually a workout. But it was also just like the most demoralizing thing ever because it just obviously just keeps growing back, and you're just like, this is never going to get any better.
Yeah.
You know.
My dad, when they moved to upstate New York to Rochester, and they bought this giant house on like, it was 5 acres or something of just lawn, right? So he was like, the American dream. I'm going to buy a sit-on lawnmower and I can mow my own lawn, right? But you don't understand that those things travel at like 3 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So even at like on a sit-on, he's mowing it for like 2 hours, you know, just to get across 5 acres of grass.
Also, you need it to be flat.
So that was okay, but it was literally the time involved. He was like, he did it once. I was like, I'm never doing that again. Like I'm not spending multiple hours on a lawnmower to get this thing like done. So at one point they fenced off or cut a line across this thing and let like half of it go out to pasture. You just stop mowing it and see what happens.
When I was in ecology, the best part was the people who got super like uppity about, oh wait, you cut your grass? Oh, that's too bad. I garden my these people who you're wasting good ecology on having a yard. Like the distribution of takes about
the whole ecosystem
care,
you're destroying there.
It is pretty funny to me.
So I'm curious about the draft stuff, we had a couple of emails that were interesting on this topic. Actually, by the way, I need to give credit to somebody that emailed us before the draft. I don't think we ever got around to this email. A guy called Joe Davis, who wrote in basically with the Rosetta Stone of the Saints draft, right? How they draft, what they value, what they do, predicting how they would react to certain players. And I actually nailed their their two first-round picks. It was like they will value Chris Olave over guys like, Traylon Burks or whoever else, and they'll value a Trevor Penning over people like Charles Cross or whatever other available tackle. Now, the way the draft unfolded, you can kind of say, all right, that they were kind of left with those two players anyway. But credit to that guy. I think he did nail that from an email. The next one, we got a guy emailing in. Let me reel this out. This one's from Switzerland. We've got quite the worldwide
like that.
The listenership. My God, the sickness has robbed my brain of the capacity to think. I can't form words, which is a problem when you're talking on a podcast. Cosmopolitan, I think, was the word I was actually trying to generate there. Anyway, hi guys, love your pod. In fact, I think I'm getting to the point where I prefer to think about team building than to watch the actual games. Here are some thoughts on draft pick trade value discussion. I want to suggest a different kind of view to the trade up by the Lions to acquire the number 12 overall pick for the Vikings. We compared the value of the picks the Lions gave up to the value of the picks they got, but he thinks we should factor in the player they traded up for, Jameson Williams. Let's say the Lions had Jameson Williams as the 9th best player on their big board, just like PFF. In my opinion, that means that Jameson Williams is worth the 9th overall pick in the draft. So when you're equating that to the Jimmy Johnson trade value or whatever, that's 1350 points. The Lions pick him at 12, but that shouldn't be the pick you're factoring in because what they acquired is Jameson Williams, not a theoretical 12th overall pick. If you think that Jameson Williams is worth the pick number 9, you compare the value to the 9th pick to whatever they gave up, not to the 12th pick. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Best regards from Switzerland, Dominic. I think that's kind of intriguing because from what I understand, the way the stuff that you do or the PFF trade value charts, they can compare historical WAR expected from a given draft spot, right? But there probably is something to the idea that if, particularly the consensus, if your opinion of a player and the consensus board, if that's telling you this guy is worth X spots ahead of the pick he's actually available at, that should factor in, right?
I think so. So there's a great question. There's a few lines of research that I think would combat this, but also support what he's saying in a sliver of situations. So when we first started doing this 2018 draft, it was the Colts and it was the Jets trading up for Darnold, and we were using Pro Football Reference's approximate value, which does a good job doesn't do the greatest job of positional value. Like when Adrian Peterson won the MVP, he had the most approximate value in the league, which I think we all know that even when a running back wins the MVP, he's not truly the most valuable player in the league. And so when we did that, the Colts became an underwhelming favorite in that trade. And they ended up winning the trade, but overwhelmingly so. Then there was an article that came out, or a blog post by Michael Lopez, who runs data and analytics for the NFL, basically saying you have to factor in superstars. And I think that that's what this is getting at, which is to say there's a fat tail associated with the 12th pick that is not necessarily inherent in the 32nd pick. And the problem I have with this particular example is almost entirely that fat tail is associated with quarterbacks. So, when Timo Risky rebuilt our model, he allowed for adding in the quarterback who can be about 4 times more valuable than the other, When they bust, they're terrible. But when they hit, or even if they moderately hit like Mac Jones or somebody like that, that position just offers so much surplus value. The trading up for a quarterback is usually fine. Even the Darnold trade was fine. The Mahomes trade, the Watson trade, all those trades are fine on average because if the guy performs at a normal level, there's so much surplus value inherent in that draft pick. The hard part is future research has then suggested, and this is by Timo, who published it on our website last year, which is to say there's really no such thing as a steal. In essence, when a team like the Raiders goes up and takes Cleveland Farrell at 4 or Alex Leatherwood at 18 or 19, I can't remember the exact pick, essentially what they're doing is sports betting, right? They are laying $1.10 to win $1.
Right.
and everybody else behind them is being essentially the sports book, because you get one player more of value dropping back to you. The problem is that the statistics have shown that's those steals. So think Derwin James falling to 17. Think of Jamison Williams falling to 12. Think of Nakobe Dean falling to the third round. Generally speaking, those players don't end up overperforming the draft position.
Okay.
So essentially the idea is reaches are real. So if you reach on a player, chances are he's going to underperform where you drafted him. But steals don't really exist.
Steals. So when we talk about player sliding, what's the source level set that we're working from, right? So Derwin James was expected to go higher. Oops, I jinxed him. We can't call him by his name or he'll get injured. So on this show,
okay. I don't know the rules, but
he's the player.
The player, yeah. It's like in Madden, LAC number 33.
Right, exactly.
Or now he's 3 now, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
So we can't anyway. That guy, the player who we just jinxed and will therefore miss next year, he was expected to go high, ends up falling to 17. When he was expected to go high, what are we using to get that piece of information?
The consensus big board.
So we're using because that's the key to this question, right? Is that in theory, because I've advocated for a while, right, that essentially the NFL teams are bad individually at saying we like this player, we're going to go get this player, he will be better than you think he is, we win, right? So actually, a lot of what scouting departments do is a waste of time, because you'd be as well using the wisdom of the crowds and just taking the consensus board, converting your scouting department to just being a vetting agency, right? And all they do is they go and find out who's the worst attitude in the world. You talk to the dude for 5 minutes. I sent Steve a clip, right? So I was famously immediately out on Jared Goff the second I found out he didn't know where the sun rose from. Like, I don't care. I just refuse to believe that you can be an NFL quarterback at a high level if you reach that level in life and do not know where the sun rises. I can't. I'm not connecting that. I'm calling it a win.
Well, what about the 2 cell phone guy that we heard about?
Exactly. 2 cell phone guy. Immediately. As soon as he walks in the room, I'm out, right? And I sent Steve a clip yesterday of Blake Bortles, who was, I don't know what the hell it was, but it was some little composite of him answering some interview thing. Some woman goes, so what do you usually do first thing in the morning? And he was like, I take a piss. All right. And then they were like, what would you be doing if you hadn't been an NFL quarterback? He's like, I don't know, probably ripping cigs. And okay, what are we?
Yeah.
All of a sudden your career is becoming a lot more clear to me. So that's what your scouting department does, right? They just talk to a dude, they scratch off guys who are immediately obviously not going to work. People that, the medical red flags, those, all they're doing is taking names off your board, but your board is the consensus board, and you're not spending however much you spend on a scouting department replicating the job that is not provably any better than just the wisdom of the crowd.
I think, to be fair, that's a lot of what a regional scout's job is. I think when you talk to people in the league, we have former people that used to work for us that are now scouts, and you meet them up at the combine, you're like, hey, what's your job? And a lot of it is background info. A lot of it is that kind of thing, because I think Arif Hassan was the first one to do the consensus board. I think he does a great job. He also gets information. They're not necessarily public boards, but he gets information from people, maybe not in the league, but he has more boards than are just the public consensus. So what I'm saying is not necessarily true about his particular consensus board, but I think the difference between the public consensus boards and what actually happens is all the stuff you just talked about.
Right.
Every single time I talk to somebody in the league and I'm like, hey, why didn't so-and-so work out? It's like, he eats Honey Nut Cheerios in the morning, or why didn't this work out? He's a doofus. What would you trade for this player? He's like, I wouldn't touch this player. We had a 4th round grade on him. He's an idiot. And it's like, okay, so now, but I agree with you. And this is, every single market acts this way, though. Every single sports bettor, right, has, like we talk about Chiefs Chargers week 2. Some guy likes Chiefs -4. Some guy likes the Chargers -1. And you take the average of all those opinions, and that's where you get Chiefs -3.
So is the reason that guys sliding in the draft generally are not steals because of that stuff, right? Because the reason they're sliding is the stuff that the public doesn't know about, and therefore the NFL simply values them lower than everybody else because of these things.
But it doesn't even we don't even need an explanation for it. I think it's just really market based. It's to say, like, if Nakobe Dean falls to the third round, that means 32 teams felt one way about a player, which has so much more information than one team felt that Clelin Ferrell was worth the 4th pick in the draft. I think it's more of a market-based thing where it's – and I don't – the wisdom of the crowds is a little bit of a misused term. The wisdom of the crowds requires a larger than 30 set of independent opinions. And so I think the NFL operates more independently than some of the groupthink in the media and so on and so forth. But I still don't know – that's why there's still an edge. That's why the market isn't super efficient, isn't completely efficient, but it's a lot more efficient than we had the tussles with Jets fans who are like, oh, Jermaine Johnson's the 10th best player in the draft. And it's like, okay, but he went 26th. He's the 26th best player in the draft, and you paid more than the 26th.
Not
pick
according to most teams, he's not.
That's what I'm saying. So it took 25 teams, and some teams had to pick twice, so it's less than that. But a big fraction of teams deemed him not worthy of that pick, and so that information matters. There's also the whole thing, and again, going back to the draft, like, we have to be careful about who is saying what. Jermaine Johnson's position on the consensus board was somewhere around pick 10. The team that picked 10th was the Jets, right? Who everybody thought they were going to link him to there. The other team that was the Seahawks. There were 2 teams out of 32 that were rumored to like him. And, as much as the Daniel Jeremiahs of the world and everybody want to stay independent, I mean, they're getting their information about who is who from these teams. So, there's a little PR spin. And there was actually a few people within the league who messaged me and said, Jermaine Johnson's not the 10th best player in the draft. The Jets gassed him up, and then they get him at 26. This is a PR thing, right? All those things make this, all these things drive me to the point of if Jamison Williams is being picked 12th, he's the 12th best player in the draft.
I mean, look, the Trayvon Walker thing is a perfect example, right? Like, I don't know how many people ended up with him as the number 1 player in their big board, but literally 0 people would have done had it not been for the fact that the Jags were obviously, the closer we got to the draft, the more apparent it became that he was going to be the number 1 overall pick, and certainly for a while it was apparent that he was in the conversation. Mm-hmm. So if he appeared number 1 on a big board on any of these consensus, boards that went in there, it was only because because of the reports that the Jags were going to do that. Nobody had that guy as the number 1 player available in this draft based off independently looking through everybody's tape and saying that's the best player here. Nobody.
Yeah, and so I think the later in the draft you get, the more what I'm talking about is a robust, and there's also bigger error bars. Like being picked 60th when you were the 5th, that's nowhere near as big of a deal as being picked 11th when you're first on everybody's board.
The only thing that's sort of intriguing me about this, I think definitely if the suggestion was that just because the Lions rank him, 9th or 5th or whatever it is, if the Lions had him as the 5th best player on their board and he's available at 12, they should go, oh, that's massive value. That's the number we should be using, make the trade. But if they're using some kind of composite of their opinion and the consensus board, and they both say the same thing, it's like now we actually start to have quite a lot of opinions here. Now there's also almost a corresponding number of opinions in the rest of the league passing on this guy X number of times.
And there's also the betting markets, which I know, people, the betting markets for a NFL draft are not as sharp as a side and total in the NFL, but they do a pretty good job. And I know specifically that's part of what goes into teams' processes for for trying to see expectations, right? And that's where they're not caught off guard nearly as much because Jordan Davis, his number moved from 13.5 to 14.5 to 15.5 back down to 13.5, and he's picked 13th. Funny, like the people who have real skin in the game on some of these things are not getting it wrong.
Which is, by the way, why we talk about moves like the Raiders, right, where they keep breaching every single year. The reason that's as bad as it is because teams are not that in the dark about where these guys should be going because of things like the betting market. You should have a pretty good idea of where you can get that guy, and it's a hell of a lot lower than where you've been getting him every year.
Right. Like if you bet every single, let's say Jets, if you bet on the Jets in every single game of the season, chances are you're going to lose the VIG. You might even lose more. because there's a really small chance that the entire market is going to get them wrong systematically for an entire, right? You know, if you're the Raiders and you consistently pick off the consensus board, then there's a pretty small chance you're going to be, you could be right on one of them, right? But chances are you're going to be right on all of them is pretty low, right? And so, and it's so funny because when we give out, we talk about teams that had, quote, good drafts or bad drafts. The teams that we say had good drafts, you know, the Jets are a little bit different. I think it's the Jets pick good players, and that, you know, they might have paid too much for Breece Hall and Jermaine Johnson, but their top 2 picks are fine. But like we look at the teams that are having great drafts, all the Chiefs really did for the most part after the McDuffie pick is let the draft come to them.
Yeah.
I mean, they traded back in round 2, let the Patriots take Tyquan Thornton, let George Pickens go to the Steelers, and then they just took the next best wide receiver. So the Ravens are the same thing.
Yeah. Should we now, based off what we've just been talking about, should we completely reevaluate the Chiefs draft and be like, no, this is just a fine draft? It's not great because the difference between the value that we're assigning to it of the consensus versus where they got these guys is irrelevant historically.
Well, okay. I would agree with that, but then everybody's getting a C or worse.
Right.
It is a grade because there, and we have shown, you know.
So we're reinforcing the people that are like, oh, anybody throwing a draft grade after the draft is an idiot. Can't tell anything until 3 years' time. This is dumb.
Yeah.
I'm not reading it. Actually, it turns out that guy's dead on, and we should listen to him more.
Yeah. The thing about the draft is, I mean, historically, teams have not, and general managers have not been able to systematically beat it on a per pick basis, right? So essentially, if all you do is pick the best player off the consensus board and mix in positional value, which is what the Chiefs did really well. You're talking about defensive end, corner, wide out, safety, and then linebacker, and then tackle, and then a bunch of corners. Like, you know, Packers as well. Like Packers' first few picks got dragged because interior defensive lineman, linebacker. But then after that, it was really a bunch of really good picks. Patriots go 100 picks up the consensus board for like a guard.
Yeah.
You know, that's a double whammy. You trade up.
Having traded away like a Pro Bowler for a 5th-round pick.
Jets trade up for a running back. And again, no one says Breece Hall sucks, but like that's a tough one, right? You trade a 5th-round pick. A 5th-round pick has about a 12% chance of being a starter in the league. So, and again, when I talk about this from a betting perspective, it's like being a bettor. You know, when I want to bet on a game, I'm laying $110 to win 100. That 100 over time is going to kill me if I'm just flipping coins. The Jets, like everybody's like, well, what's the big deal? It's just a 5th-round pick. Well, you're trading 1.125 starters in your mind for one starter. And so you can hit that you know, people win bets all the time.
Yeah.
But over time, you're the square bettor and they're the bookmaker.
Right.
And that's, you know, how you know teams get stuck like, trading up too much.
I've made the analogy before that it's like poker, right? The idea with poker is to get your hand in, you get your money in with the best hand every time. Doesn't mean you'll win every time. You'll lose. You'll get the bad end of the percentages sometimes. But if you do it every single time over the long haul, you will win. You will win more money than other people because you always have the better hand. That's the idea, right? It's the same thing with the betting markets. Like you just want to be on the right side of the percentages all of the time. And if you can do that, you will win in the long haul. Doesn't mean you won't crap out on a bet every now and again, or you won't get the crappy end of the distribution every now and again.
Yep.
So the next thing I want to pivot to, I will get to right after we give the PFF discount code. If you're listening, you can get 25% off any PFF subscription by using the promo code NFLPOD, exclusive to this podcast. So now Eric Eager is complicit in boosting our numbers. What can you get with a free PFF subscription? With a PFF subscription, all of PFF's locked article content, fantasy football rankings and projections coming soon, data and grades from the entire 2021 season, the upcoming 2022 season, and all the back seasons we've done. So NFL data goes all the way back to 2006, college data back to 2014, and plenty more. Support the pod and use the promo code NFLPOD for 25% off any sub. So we had an email in from a lifelong Jags fan. That's got to be pretty rough.
It's got to be rough.
Also, because being born in the late 90s, he says he missed the majority of the Jags' good years. You know, and besides the 2017 season, he's learned to live with seasonal disappointment. This guy's name is Brian Stokes. Long email that I'm going to essentially paraphrase or pivot to what we want to talk about from it. He was essentially asking, with this Rams, the way the Rams have been doing this whole, F them picks, the strategy that they've been employing. We talked about that a lot in the podcast. He was essentially asking, should bad organizations think more about doing something different with that number 1 overall pick, right? Why do we not see the number 1 overall pick traded for a sure thing player? Like, generally speaking, the number 1 overall pick is only going to be traded if you're getting out of that pick and trading down a few spots and doing just accumulating more draft capital. But we talked about this before with one of the things I hated, one of the things I didn't like about the Jags selecting Trayvon Walker was it feels like this team has been swinging for upside for a while, right? And at some point when you're this bad, you should probably just take an upgrade, like a clear, sure, certain upgrade. Grab Aidan Hutchinson because the chance of him being a bad player are very small relative to Trayvon Walker. Trayvon Walker's chances of being a truly great player may be higher, but that's what you thought about Caleb Chase on. That's what you thought about C.J. Henderson. That's what you've been doing this for a while and you keep missing. So why not just take a definite upgrade? Why not take it a step further and say, what can you get with the number 1 overall pick in terms of like an actual NFL player that is already good? Why do more teams not see the value in those picks and use them to get NFL commodities?
It's a good question. Let me go here to maybe explain why I think that teams don't do that. If you look at, so let's say Von Miller's the player you're thinking about, right? So $20 million APY currently for the Bills. I'm trying to find – so Chase Young was the 2nd overall pick in 2020, $8.6 million. So you're paying essentially like the part about the number 1 pick that people that I think has value is there is boom potential for this pick and there is cost control. Because there were actually, and the good way to explain this is like with the Patriots at the quarterback position last year. You had Cam Newton and you had Mac Jones, who were both basically making the same amount of money. Both basically this equal abilities, in my opinion. Not equal abilities, but equal power ratings, you'd say. Both guys are worth about the same amount. Mac Jones, if Mac Jones blows up, he can't come back and ask for more money the next year. Like that, right. The control on him, there's no risk. There's no upward risk in addition to the downward risk, right? Cam Newton, if he had an MVP caliber season, he's going right back to the drawing board with you and asking for the $30 million contract. So it's almost entirely about money. It's almost entirely about that differential between Von Miller, the $12 million per year, and Chase Young, and it's almost all entirely in the upside risk too, because if you're taking the guy at 1, you want him to be a Hall of Fame type of player. But even if he's a median player, you're getting surplus value per dollar. It's a Baker Mayfield thing too. Yeah. So it's a combination. I'm unwieldy in this answer, but it's a combination of if the guy's average, he's still a value. If the guy's amazing, he's still a value, and you don't have the complementary risk associated with him wanting more money if he becomes great.
Right.
Those two things, I think, are the reason why teams don't do that. The Rams are really the interesting one where –
I think if you're trading for a guy with that kind of capital, you probably have to just assume that you're paying him top of the market money regardless, right? You're either paying him immediately. He's either on that contract already. You're paying it to him the second you trade for him, or you're paying it to him like the earliest opportunity after that point. So either way – you're expecting that is top of the market money. To me, though, the interesting thing about like the first couple of picks, they're definitely cheaper, right? Obviously we're talking, it's like half the money.
Yeah.
But they're not, they're actually quite expensive for certain positions anyway. Like, you know what I mean? The number 1 overall pick gets to the point where it's not like you're still discounting, but what you're doing then is trading the certainty, right, of trading for whoever, like a Von Miller, versus the saving. But it's different to like trading, say multiple first-round picks, but neither one of them is higher than 15. Like the 15th overall pick is getting paid peanuts relative to the top of the market guy. The number 1 overall pick, it's not Like, he's not in the same ballpark, but that difference gets a lot closer.
And it's true about all top 10 picks, right? So if you have one Pro Bowl, you get the transition tag as your fifth-year option. If you have two Pro Bowls, so like Kyler Murray's fifth-year option is the franchise tag dollar. So later on, but it's still, you still have the cost control that is so effective. Like when Patrick Mahomes in year 2 was the MVP of the league, like there's no discussion about him getting more money because that's earmarked into the situation. So I think that's the hard part.
I mean, I think for a year where there's a quarterback, it makes sense, right? Because all the things we always talk about, the surplus value that a quarterback that hits brings is the most valuable thing in the NFL. So if you don't have a star quarterback, you should always be taking the quarterback number 1 overall. But in a year where there isn't a quarterback, I mean this year, right? No quarterback worth taking number 1. Or even if there was, you already had one.
Do you think, though, that the problem is the optics of trading out of that pick when no one wants it are pretty bad? So
that's probably the handicap this year. But let's say there's a year where there's a Myles Garrett out there, right? Or whoever the sort of consensus non-quarterback number 1 pick is.
But don't you think, though, that I guess unless there's a team that's super desperate, but the one of the best things you can do as an NFL team is get a premium position player at half the cost.
Right, but the value being, like, isn't it? You're bad for a reason, right?
I think
part of the reason is probably that you suck at identifying good players.
But I think the problem is, I think we're resulting a little bit to the particular situation, which is the Jaguars are a mess. They picked not the best player.
Sure, but
and the bust potential is immense here.
Forget the Jags, but even like generally, just bad teams that are consistently picking at the top of the draft, and there's a few of them over the years. You don't need to, it's not an unusual circumstance. Isn't there a case that those guys should be more interested in a Rams-style strategy of you should be willing to pay for certainty, right? And they're kind of doing it. Like, you look at free agency. Again, I don't want to harp on Jacksonville all the time, but, like, Jacksonville have to pay a premium now to bring in free agents because nobody wants to go to Jacksonville. So they're already, like, overpaying, quote-unquote, to just get people in the door. So why not overpay to get a guarantee upgrade at a spot who's a veteran player rather than hoping you don't screw it up and picking one?
Because I think that the prices are all baked in. So we see, Ramsey, we see Miller, we see those players, and they hit, right? We ignore Jamal Adams. We ignore Frank Clark, Odell Beckham Jr. Like, I think the Rams are an interesting story because they made us reevaluate all of our assumptions about the game. But at the same time, they are just an N of one, right? If any one of the Rams trades flops, I don't think that they win a Super Bowl, And so it's just like, it's the difference between laying plus 100 and, minus 500. And, like, it's just the cost, right? It's, if Miller doesn't work out or I'm trying to think of the Ramsey doesn't work out or so on and so forth, or Stafford doesn't work out, like, the whole thing blows up. The Rams just happened to hit on all the players that they traded for, and then they have the secondary benefit. So this is where I'll give them credit. When you don't pick high in the draft, your guys don't come up for big contracts all that much. So they have an added cap benefit of never, like Myles Garrett, never getting to the place where they have to give him the highest contract. It's the winner's curse of hitting on draft picks in some ways. So they don't have that, and that may be baked into your argument, which is, okay, I'll pay up for this player. The one of the benefits is that when that player, reaches the end of the deal. I just don't think that many front offices think that far ahead, nor should they, because for the most part, all but 6 front offices don't have a leash that long.
I think the other element at play is if you're bad enough, that guy isn't making any difference anyway. Like, if you transplanted Aaron Donald, right, and put him on the Jags right now, what difference does he make? Obviously he makes an impact on the defensive line. Their defense is scarier with him there than without him, but what is he doing to the Jacksonville chances of winning a Super Bowl next year or next year?
Well, that's the problem with
Probably
football.
not
though.
much.
That's the problem with football, right? There's only one position where you insert player A onto this team and it changes their straits dramatically.
Right.
I think what the Rams have shown us is, if over time you've got a bunch of houses money, right? That was really the issue, was that, you looked at that roster. The Rams were second, I think, last year in wins above replacement by non-quarterbacks. It was just Goff was holding them back a little bit. And so then they struck on a Matthew Stafford. You can't build I think, you can't build a team around Matthew Stafford. I mean, Detroit proved that for a decade. You can insert a Matthew Stafford onto an amazing team and win a Super Bowl. I think that's clear. I think there's only probably, 4 or 5 quarterbacks that you can build around. Like, take a bad team and erect a team around this player, and he ends up being good enough to win a Super Bowl with. Every other player is sort of in the same strait as Stafford, where you sort of see a team accumulate assets, and then there's the gap at quarterback, and then maybe push everything into the future to try to win now. They did it, so we'll have to reevaluate that situation. But I think most teams aren't in that position, right? Like the Jaguars aren't in that position. The Vikings aren't in that position. The Bears aren't in that position. So they're better off sort of like doing it the traditional way, which is to draft a quarterback high, hope that you use the bounty that you get from not paying them that much money to hit on 21 other bets. And that's a tough thing to do.
I mean, I think the other theory with the Rams strategy is I don't know that you would be able to do that starting from a lower ebb. Like, I think you would need to have a baseline of at least an average team to even attempt what the Rams have done in terms of strategy. Like,
I think it's even bigger, right? You have to be a lot better. I think
this studs and duds, or studs. What's the term you use for them?
Stars and scrubs.
That's it. Stars and scrubs. The stars and scrubs strategy that they've had doesn't work if you're starting from where the Jags are. Like, it's just not gonna. The stars aren't gonna make enough of an impact for the rest of the roster to keep their heads above water. The rest of the roster needs to be at a level that's okay to begin with. Then you add the stars to it, and now you can start to tinker with the balance there. So I guess that's the overall answer to that question is, when you stink, the value of a guy being on a cheap contract is actually worth more than the impact even an Aaron Donald can make.
Because you're so much further away from being good, and the more of those sort of building blocks you can put together and at cost-effective numbers, I think is a big bounty.
But I do think there was still mileage in a team like Jacksonville, who has been swinging for potential for a long time, to just take a sure upgrade on a cost-controlled deal like at Aidan Hutchinson. So how would, looking back at the draft now, how would the analytics kind of community, you're the spokesman now for the analytics community, that's how it's going to work, how would the quote-unquote analytics community draft differently to the way the NFL is doing right now?
I think the NFL is doing an increasingly better job. I mean, you look in the round one, like safety is a position that I've always thought was more valuable, but the marketplace doesn't believe so.
Right.
And so my opinion actually doesn't matter there, in that, Jason Fitzgerald did a great job of showing this. It's like the premiumness of a position is the fraction of players in the top 20 who are accessible through free agency. It's the one minus that, right?
Okay.
So quarterbacks, I mean, they're, except for rare circumstances, elite quarterback play are not accessible through free agency. Running backs are accessible. Like Sony Michel just signed with the Dolphins yesterday, and he was an 800-yard back, right? Wide receivers not accessible through free agency for the most, but not elite ones. Tight ends are. Tackles are not accessible through free agency. Guards and centers are. Safeties are. Corners are an interesting one. Linebackers are accessible through free agency. Defensive ends aren't. Elite caliber ones. So I think the NFL is catching on to that. Like, we're seeing, guards. I mean, the guards went a little bit high. Zion Johnson, as well as Chris's favorite guy, Kenyon Green. You saw 3 safeties in round one, which is kind of interesting. You didn't see any running backs, but a running back went at 30 and a running back went at 41. Like, my opinion, I think things are getting more rational, but you're still seeing teams trade up, and we look at Kwesi Adofo-Mensah from Minnesota. Like, I think he was showing, people are mad, I think, because he went against the grain, where he lost trades via the Jimmy Johnson chart and won trades via the Spielberger, Fitzgerald, and PFF charts. People are like, well, wait a sec. No. It's like, well, the teams that are going to gain an edge are going to be the teams that sort of go countercultural there. So to me, if I was looking at the draft and like, okay, where are some things I can exploit? It's like we're still seeing a lot of reaches and we're still seeing a lot of trade ups. Positional value is getting a lot more rational, but we're still seeing a lot of guards and stuff taken in round 1 and a little bit high, safeties as well. But it's getting better. It's moving in a positive direction, I would say.
Do you think that Kwesi has been mislabeled a little bit as he's seen as this analytics GM, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the guy has like an economics background, right? He's a banker. Like he didn't come necessarily, like his origins weren't from the analytics world. They were from a finance world, and financial people operate slightly differently. And the things that he's been doing as Vikings GM, like one of the frustrations is I've gone on rants before, is like, it's the same. Like, what has changed? This is, if you kind of wrote down the totality of what's happened since he came in, you would be like, this is a Rick Spielman playbook we're running right now. This is the same. Nothing has changed. But it's also the kind of playbook that you would run if you're from an economics world where you're like, let's push a little bit of every lever. Let's diversify the portfolio. Let's not put too many eggs in one basket. Like, this is how economics people work.
Yeah, and that's like, I think, a misnomer about what the Vikings brass was before Kwesi. Like, from 2015, I think, until 2021, the Vikings had drafted the most players in the NFL. They had the most trades. Yeah. Right? Spielman was doing this kind of stuff. And people gave him crap because he would move back into round 7. He wasn't trading right, which in reality, he was like, if you're trading back in the draft, you're generally speaking getting value. And I think that's what Kwesi, showed, which was, a lot of people thought that the trade back with Detroit was a bad trade, but mathematically it was a fine trade. It was just the optics were bad because every team around that pick got much more of a ransom for their pick. And so, the thing about the Vikings for me is not necessarily that Kwesi's doing a bad job. It's that I think expectations were he was going to come in and change everything. But you come in January, they weren't even expecting to fire Spielman, right? They were expected to fire Zimmer and not Spielman. They fire Spielman out of the blue. They hire him. Well, you're working with his scouts. You're working with their big boards. I know they hired Ryan Grigson of all people to help him, which that's a questionable move as well. And then you have ownership's affinity for Kirk Cousins. So you had so many constraints that my question was, how could Kwesi's playing poker with other people's cards? And so he could probably play a little bit more optimally, but they're still other people's cards. So that was kind of the frustration with this year. And I think the league also, just from what I can hear around, is like when Kwesi calls you, everybody's like, okay, let's write this down because this is coming from a different point of view than most GMs. So I think he's also sort of countercultural in the way in which he was approaching the draft, and people took heed from it. And he was never going to get the best value because people are sort of skeptical when he calls them, oh, this is an econ guy, right, from Princeton. What is he gonna do here? I'm not gonna be the first guy to get fleeced by Kwesi.
Like if he's giving you an offer, you're immediately like, this is the thing I've said where, like, if Bill Belichick calls you up looking to give you a player, like
he's washed
immediatly. I'm not interested. My only point with the Kwesi thing generally has been like, if you're why fire everybody else if you're not going to change things? Like, because surely, like, if ever there's a point of like reset, the Vikings have been stuck in this rut of the same thing for a lot of years now. You're like, if surely at that point, okay, head coach gone, GM gone, the determination has been made that this rut we're in is not where we want to remain. So what's the point in firing everybody and then bringing in more people that are going to do the same thing? Well,
especially if the whole like thesis is that the coaching staff was really bad last year and they need a new voice. And then if that were actually true, then you wouldn't need to draft players who play the positions of the players you just drafted because in theory, if the coaches were better, they'd be able to coach up the guys that Mike Zimmer wasn't getting anything out of.
And you also wouldn't need to fire the GM. Like,
right.
Spielman could still be there if that was the case.
I mean, I think that there were a few issues with Spielman. I think, like, if you look at people that cover the team, it's like he wasn't accountable, which Kwesi has been, to his credit, has done a lot of press conferences, been accountable. Same thing with Zimmer, and there were obvious tensions there. But I think we have to face facts about the Vikings, which is just that the ownership just wants the team to be okay all the time. They've been bad the last 2 years, but they've only played 2 meaningless games. Week 18 and week 17 of the 2 years. And if that's your goal is to have a team that's sort of always competitive, and they look in the Kirk Cousins era, the Vikings have never been more than a 7-point underdog in a regular season game.
Right.
So you're always competitive.
Steve is actually having Rick Spielman on the podcast in one of the shows that I'm not here in a couple of weeks' time. Nothing I want him to ask more than essentially that question. Like, how much does ownership in Minnesota actually want to win? Or how much are they just content with just don't be bad?
Well, and you and I follow the team very closely, and so like one of the biggest things was, their first year they fired Mike Tice like the moment after his first game in a very embarrassing way.
Yeah.
They get Childress in the fold. They go all in. They get Favre, right? And they get an inch away basically from the Super Bowl in 2009. They give Childress a 5-year extension. 2010 happens and it's a mess. Favre lost his fastball. They trade for Randy Moss. Randy Moss is a malcontent. Mm-hmm. All that stuff happens, and they fire Childress 10 games into a 5-year extension. I think if you look at like the history and you look at the Wilfs, you look and you say, okay, and then next year 2011 with Frazier, they went 3-13. That's really the last year and the only year this century that they've been bad. If you're the Wilfs, like I think it's somewhat rational to be like, look, we went all in and tried to actually win a Super Bowl once, and it failed badly for us. And there was a 2011 season where Gates were bad and interest in the team was bad. If we just get this thing on the green every single year, I mean, we know like Vikings fans are rabid and they care, and some of them are actually okay with beating the Packers once a year but never making the playoffs.
So this is the thing. Like, how many owners do you think in the NFL? Because to me, there's so many edges that exist. So the NFL constrains competition in a lot of different ways, right? Between the draft, free agency, the salary cap. There's a lot of things you cannot do to just buy success the way you can in soccer, right? Like oil states are buying up Paris Saint-Germain, and Saudi Arabia buys Newcastle, and the Newcastle United they became the world's most spend-happy club in January, right? Immediately, right off the bat. You can just essentially buy success. Man City's on a giant run of winning the Premier League because they're backed by an oil state.
Yeah.
Chelsea are getting sold, but Abramovich started that, right? Russian oligarch comes in and buys success. You can't do that in the NFL because there's a salary cap. You can't just go out there and buy Patrick Mahomes from the Chiefs, plug him in as your starting quarterback, and all the other things you want to do. But you can do a lot outside of those constraints, I think, to give you a huge edge, right? Like, there's no reason if you're an owner that wants to win the Super Bowl more than anything else, you wouldn't have the best training facilities in the league. You wouldn't have the largest scouting department in the league, the biggest coaching staff in the league. Like, all these things that there are no limits on in terms of spending, you should be spending the most, right? If you rationally want to win. But people aren't, and there's not like an exploding market in this area.
And even the teams that we would consider smart, like, I mean, they're pinching pennies over
anything.
Yeah, but you're right.
How many of these owners do you think really want to win, and how many do you think are in this for the tax breaks?
I mean, we live in Cincinnati, right? Like the one that gets, so the hard part is baseball. You play 162 games. The wheat and the chaff get separated pretty easily. Basketball is the same. Basketball is a game where you play hundreds of possessions, and the thing gets pretty fair really quick. Football, I mean, shit, the Bengals just made the Super Bowl.
And you get playoff series where you got to do it 4 times.
Whereas the Bengals almost got beat by the Raiders here, and then go and win against Titans, Chiefs, and almost beat the Rams. And we forget now. I mean, Carson Palmer was sort of sour grapes at the Super Bowl. Remember, we were there, and he's like, "No, this team's never going to support Joe Burrow." And everybody's like, "Ah!" Oh. It's like, have you looked at the history of this franchise? He's kind of right, and yet, but football's so noisy, right? It was why it was so important for the Eagles to win the Super Bowl when they got there, doing the 4th down stuff, doing the calling us out and saying, "Hey, we love PFF's data." Like when the Giants won in 2011, being our first client, that was a really important time because football's a noisy game, right? The Rams, like I'm perpetrator number one. Like I didn't think the Rams all-in thing was going to work. It didn't make a lot of it. To me, it was not the sound way to do it. And they win the Super Bowl. And guys like me have to eat a little bit of crow. We have to learn a little bit about the game, and then we have to know when to say, yeah, they won, but I wouldn't do it again.
Have you completely changed your mind on that, or are you still kind of the opinion of, I mean, they just call it variance?
I mean, they were a 4 seed who beat a 6 seed in the NFC title game and then a 4 seed in the Super Bowl. So part of me is saying, look, they got a little lucky. But I also will change my tone to the point where like there you can see where they sort of found crevices that other team and look, they're being followed. So there is some signal to what they're doing. Now, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I'm really happy that the Chiefs said, "Oh, there's a bunch of teams that are going all in. Let's trade our our second best player, get 12 picks, and build for the future, a la what the Patriots did for so many years." And because there's not a ton – because my charge, and this is where I was wrong about the Rams just in the 2021 sphere, there was actually a ton of value there's a ton of value in being one of the better teams last year because the league didn't have good teams. I did the Kansas City Chiefs pregame show for the AFC title game, and I said point blank, I said this Chiefs team's favored to make the Super Bowl, and they're not even that good. So the Rams looking at the league and saying there's not a lot of great teams right now and going all in was smart on their part. This year now, Bills are good, Bucks are good, Packers are good, Rams are good, Chargers are good. Let's say Browns, Bengals, Ravens, Denver Broncos.
It's insane this year.
If you're pushing your chips to go all in this year and you're killing your future to do it, I think you're dumb, right? Because your chances of making the Super Bowl, it's a gauntlet this year. The team this is going to be another year for exactly a different reason where like a 4 seed wins the Super Bowl because it's just everybody's beating each other up. Last year, a 4 seed won the Super Bowl because the 1, 2, and 3 seeds weren't very good.
To me, the kind of not the smartest thing, but like one of the aspects. So when they traded for Matthew Stafford, it was like, how much better do they think Stafford actually is? Because Stafford's baseline, it's good, but it's not amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's not. He hasn't really shown that he's the guy. Like he's not a Patrick Mahomes. He's not a Aaron Rodgers. He's not in that category. And there were people that said he was, right, all the way along. There were people that said, yeah, no, Matthew Stafford is like he's a superstar level quarterback. You put a superstar team around him, and that's the Matthew Stafford you're going to get. And even that didn't really pan out. If you look, he had a PFF grade of 82. He was like the 13th ranked quarterback during the regular season. But then you started to get Matthew Stafford, you started to get an improved version during the playoffs, and his playoff grade jumped significantly, and you got a much better Matthew Stafford. And even in the playoffs, like he still had like one throw a game where he tried to pitch it to the defense.
Yeah, he led the league in interceptions.
Right. With the point being, like they didn't need Stafford to be Mahomes all the time. They just needed him to turn into Mahomes once you reach the important games and go on that run, and that's exactly what he did. Now, whether he's able to turn that on consistently for like, okay, now it's important time, play well, that's up for debate. But simply having that capacity, I think, is the important thing. Like, whatever Jared Goff was capable of doing, he's probably never going to do that, right? You were never going to get Jared Goff just turn it on and look like Tom Brady for a 4 or 5
And even then, he
stretch.
won us. He went on the road and beat the Saints in the playoffs after a 10-point deficit.
But like what that does, like the quarterback being able to turn into like a top 5 QB in the NFL for 5 games, regardless of like when they are, that's the value.
But don't you think? That is really just the difference between like right now we're so spoiled, right? When we started doing grading in 2006, there was one consistently amazing quarterback in the league, and that was Peyton Manning, right? Even Brady was sort of propped up a little bit. He needed stretches. Now there's 5 or 6 quarterbacks who are unquestionably like you get one amazing half a game out of those quarterbacks, no matter what,
right?
Every single game, and we lose the fact that back in the day, Cam Newton was like this too. Some quarterbacks are capable of the stretch. Eli Manning. Some of these quarterbacks are capable of putting together a month where they're just absolutely out of their mind, and you can win with them. But their floor is low.
Yeah.
And I think we're so spoiled by the quarterbacks who are just consistently great. Herbert, Mahomes, Burrow even is that way now. Brady, obviously, Rodgers, et cetera, that we look at a guy like Stafford, it's like, well, he's not consistently great enough. Well, the Rams saw that and said, well, we don't really need him to be because the rest of our team is great.
Yeah.
And if we can catch a string of 4 games where he's pretty damn good, we'll win the Super Bowl. And they did. And they identified, to my point of trying to give them credit, they identified the year where that was the most advantageous way of doing it. If you were in the, like, I think about the Chiefs when they won the Super Bowl in 2019 and when they went all in 2020 to try to win again, you didn't know Josh Allen was good. You didn't know Burrow and Herbert were good. Brady left the conference, et cetera. Phillip Rivers went to Indianapolis instead of playing in your division, et cetera, et cetera. There was a ton of value in getting that number 1 pole position and just being like, we're going to win this year. What was the marginal value for the Rams in getting maybe like 10% better than Stafford? It wasn't that high because the whole league was kind of like a wash of variance last year that they were able to take advantage of it.
It feels like there should be more teams now that are kind of, that's what you should be targeting, right? Because obviously the dream is you get the next Mahomes or you get the next Herbert or whoever it is. But you're not going to find that guy, right? The chances are nobody is. So what the next best thing is to get a quarterback that's pretty good, but is capable of turning into those guys for 5 games, right? Because even, the hell, Joe Flacco did that. Joe Flacco was not a particularly good quarterback and then randomly had the best 5-game stretch of his career, got a ring and $100 million contract out of it, like set up for life based off 5 games. Eli Manning, you brought up again. Like Eli Manning, you take away the 2 Super Bowl runs, what is he? It's not.
Yeah, his
great.
whole 2011 year, he was stupid.
Agreed. Yeah.
But for the most part, you take away the 2 Super Bowl. I mean, he never won another playoff game in another season, right? But even like Newton, you think about Newton on the play-for-play level.
Take away 2015. What is he?
Yeah, on the play-for-play level, he's a high yards per attempt, but low completion percentage guy. That doesn't fly in the NFL. It flew back in the day, right, where Chris Chandler could take a team to the Super Bowl, Jake Delhomme, guys like that. I mean, it was a quite a bit of a different league now. But yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be edges in sort of in looking at the league a little bit differently. I think the problem is most of the time you're wrong, and the Rams in this particular case were right, and I think that's a very important thing to realize is that looking at the league differently 9 out of 10 times you're going to fail.
How sustainable do you think their approach is? Because one of the criticisms or the way it was characterized initially is that the FDM pick, it's going all in for this year, and okay, even if they win, they won the Super Bowl, therefore they were right. It's still going to be the wrong like long-term approach because it has a shelf life. How long do you think this can work for them?
I mean,
because all those guys they traded for are still there. Like they're not.
Well, Von Miller left, so you gave up a second and a third for
the stars and like the stars of the stars and scrubs approach. Are still there.
and to the point of looking at, let's actually look at their structure here, because if you go this long, and by the way, the Washington football team they'll always be the football team to me. Went like a decade without a first round pick back in like the 60s and 70s. But when you look at the Rams salary structure, you have Donald at 27, you have Ramsey at 23, you have Kupp at 18, and you have Stafford at 13.5. No one else is above 10, and you only have seven players with a salary cap hit of over 5. There's not a ticking time bomb for their next first round pick. Think about Minnesota. We talk about them just because they're top of the mind. Justin Jefferson. That's a $30 million player next year, right? So you have to think about how to keep your quarterback happy and your wide receiver happy, and Tyreek Hill. That was always the ticking time bomb for the Chiefs. And
this is where it feels like Dallas always come unstuck. It doesn't feel like Dallas anticipates those contracts coming until they come, and it's like, oh crap, we got this deal due. Oh, now we got to cut people. See ya, Amari Cooper, get out of here.
Yeah, well, and then there's always like sort of the thinking, when you think this way, you can also be countercultural in how you approach the trades. So like the Von Miller, I always think about the Stephon Gilmore trade and the Von Miller trade. the Panthers only had to give up a 6th for Stephon Gilmore because they had enough cap space to take on his whole deal. The Rams didn't have any cap space, but they don't value picks.
Right.
So they just say, okay, 2nd and 3rd for Miller, you take all of his money. And essentially what they're doing is trading a 2nd and 3rd round pick for a chance to win a Super Bowl. Is that too high of a price? In hindsight, of course not, but at the time it felt steep, so
there's also always like there's always more layers to it, right? Like they also know that he's probably going to walk and they'll get a comp pick back for it. So it's not the totality.
And they do a great job with the comp picks. Yeah. And this is where I'll back up the people who say it might end up being bad for them. You remember the Green Bay Packers and when early in Rodgers' tenure, where it's, oh my gosh, James Jones is a 4th round pick, and oh my gosh, Sam Shields is an undrafted player, and like they had all these players come up and contribute who weren't highly sought after players. Right. And everybody's like, Ted Thompson's just really good at this stuff. This is why the Packers will compete forever. And of course, what happens is, the guy who's up big at the craps table ends up, losing a decent amount of money because he plays too long.
That was the Seahawks as well.
And that was the Seahawks, right?
You draft essentially the Legion of Boom defense, and it's like, oh, the Seahawks are just like, they're just better.
And in fact, it was worse for them because they got overconfident in their abilities to scout players, and they were one of the great perpetrators of going too high on players. So the Rams, and I think Jordan Rodriguez for The Athletic does a good job of covering it. They showed sort of like what their approach is to drafting a lot of players later on. Now, the question is how sustainable is that? Josh Hermsmeyer for 538 wrote an article that said they really don't do that much better. It is really just hinged on they get a little bit better than replacement level players for those positions, and then their stars are stars. So to me, when the Rams are going to fail when they make when they overextend themselves for a player.
It doesn't.
When they do a Frank Clark trade, right? Because the Chiefs did a Frank Clark trade and they still won a Super Bowl because their quarterback's amazing. Stafford's not good enough, in my opinion, to overcome a Frank Clark trade. Yeah. That, I think, is where the boundary is.
The value in what they're doing is not that they're dramatically better at drafting than other people with the backfill picks that they have. It's that the certainty that they're paying for with the already established NFL players has worked, and they value that more than drafting those guys and hoping they become good. But as soon as they miss, because that isn't a 100% thing either. That's nobody bats 1,000 on those trades. As soon as they miss on one of those, the whole thing unspools.
Right, and again, you can say that won't happen, but we have Jamal Adams. The Jamal Adams trade, and granted, he's a safety and Ramsey's a corner, so Ramsey's a little bit more valuable. But like when you give up 2 first-round picks for a non-quarterback, like it's going to be hard. And Ramsey just is an amazing football player that's overcome. He's basically played up to the level of that trade, which is a remarkable feat. Right. Same thing for, you think about Khalil Mack, like where the Bears are in their process. Like Khalil Mack was an absolute hit, and still like he just played up to the value of the trade. Because again, you get certainty there, but you're paying for it.
Oh yeah,
and
the problem is you're paying for certainty, and it's not certain. Like it's more certain than the draft pick that you would have been taking.
But it's costly.
Yeah, but it's not 100%. Like you're gonna miss one of them eventually. It's not a sure thing. We've all seen quote unquote sure things in the NFL go somewhere else, and it just didn't work.
And look, okay, if you're a Rams fan and you especially a Los Angeles Rams fan, you have not seen a Super Bowl win, right? You had the St. Louis Rams win it in '99. Was it all worth it? Yeah, right. Sure. Like, and that's the thing. Like we come back to, it's, this is a league where if you don't have a great quarterback, like a top end guy, the league gives you one very, very, very clear way of competing.
It's all about perspectives and like what's your actual goal, right? Like there's a lot of fans, obviously, but there's probably a lot of teams as well that like if you could just put one trophy in the cabinet, like if you could just give one Lombardi trophy over there, it's all I want. I just don't want to be the guy that has none in the trophy cabinet. I just want one of them. Put that
like Les Snead and McVay, like it's Les Snead and McVay are forever. It's immortality, right? You never can question them now, even though in theory they might have made a gamble that was
And there's definitely
asymmetric.
There's definitely teams out there that would be like, I don't care what you need to do. Just put one of those over in the cabinet and I'm good, right? I don't care if we suck for the next 20 years. Just make that happen. But then there are franchises and there are teams and there are fan bases. You get greedy and it becomes very quickly you transition from, if we could just win one Super Bowl, I would die a happy man, to, why can't we win every year? Why can't we compete every single year and rack up what the Patriots did and become a dynasty and go down in history as the greatest thing that this league has ever seen? And it's amazing how quickly you transition from one to the other. Like, if we could just not suck this year, that'd be great, right? Yeah. And then as soon as you have that one douse of success, it's like, well, there's really no reason that we shouldn't be winning this every single year. Like, why, just back it up. Like, that happened with rugby very quickly for me, right? Ireland went from, like, bottom dwellers in the routinely third or fourth, of a 6-team competition, to all of a sudden we're like the best team there and we're beating New Zealand for the first time in 108 years. And then you're like, why can't we beat New Zealand every time? Why can't we be the best team in the world? That's very quick.
That's, I think, why. And I wonder how Rams fans are. I mean, think about this, though, for a second. Like, the LA market is a very, like, distracted market. If you don't grab the attention, especially year 2 of a stadium, year 1 of being able to have people in that stadium, year 1, Super Bowl year in that stadium, again, I was very hard on the Rams' decision-making process. A lot of it, in hindsight, makes sense, even if, this thing will come toppling down if they miss on some players. Donald retires, Ramsey starts to struggle. Stafford starts to struggle incrementally. Things get worse for him. Whitworth retired. Right? There are things but look, flags fly forever. That one trophy you can't take from him. But I agree with you. Like, if let's say they struggle next year, and everybody's gonna be like, well, what the hell happened? It's like, well, no, like, that's part of the price of this trophy you just got, right? Like, and people don't necessarily stick to the plan that way.
All right, that's going to do it for the show today. Monday, we've got Austin Gale coming on. We're going to repeat a show that we did last year that people loved, the fatal flaw for all 32 NFL teams. This time, it's not going to be a quarterback for half the league like it was last time. That was a lot of the feedback is, love this show. It felt like we were hearing about the quarterback for half the league. So we're going to have a non-quarterback fatal flaw for every team in the NFL. Doctor, a pleasure, as always.
It's always fun hanging out with you and talking football, yeah.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sitting in the Steve chair, the big creaky one that's felt some things, that chair. It's not in great shape anymore. This has been fun, though. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Hope you've enjoyed listening. I'll see you on Monday. The doctor won't. It'll be Austin Gale in the chair. So till then, bye-bye.